Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. We've got a really interesting conversation today with Joanna Nguyen. Now, Joanna, you are the current CMO at Willow. I'm going to have you explain a little bit more about that. But your background is perfect to talk about our topic today, which is a CMO's guide to starting from scratch and learn as you go marketing. Now, that learn as you go motion that you're talking about, you actually helped take a company from 0 to 25 billion in an IPO. We're talking about big experience here. You worked at Amazon. I'd love to know a lot more about what you did at Amazon. I'm going to stop teasing your expertise and turn it over to you and maybe expand on that a little bit. And then we're going to jump right on into this kind of learn as you go, start from scratch marketing.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Steve. Great to be here. Yes, I'm just starting actually the position at Willow, which is they do digital twin technology for the built world. So very exciting stuff around sustainability, around energy cost savings, and what you can really do with that. Prior to that was leading marketing, or B2B marketing at a company called ChowNow, which is an online SaaS ordering company. Spent 5 years at Amazon and specifically was at a startup at Amazon. So we took Amazon Business, which is Amazon's foray into B2B retail, took that from 0 to 25 billion, helped scale that to 10 different countries. That is now, I think they have over 5 million customers worldwide. So it's just been phenomenal growth. And that was a very fun, exciting ride to be a part of from the very beginning. And then spent some time over at FireEye, which again is a company that was cybersecurity company that went through an IPO. We had several acquisitions that we did while I was there and helped build the marketing technology team up from the ground up when I was there.
The reason why I love and thank you for explaining all that is because the start from scratch, learn as you go kind of feels scrappy, kind of feels small. But what you're talking about here is our strategies that were employed at one of the biggest companies in the world, right? Amazon and PO experience and several rounds of exits there. So I want to get right into it. You have a certain philosophy around building and scaling marketing teams. And that's, I think, a great place to start out here.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think one of the things that we can chat through is maybe just even start with some of the challenges when you start thinking about how to scale and build marketing teams from the ground up. And the way that I think about those and just talk a little bit about that is one, categorize them as functional challenges, which I think you can imagine, like how do you build the marketing strategy from the ground up? What are the channels you use? Who's your ACP? What's the type of messaging? How do you talk about your value as a company? Things you kind of know. Some of the challenges there is also like you don't have historical data. So for instance, when I was at Amazon and we're getting into B2B retail, Amazon obviously world class, knows how to do consumer retail, not really understand the B2B buyer. How does a B2B buyer differ? They don't necessarily go to the kitchen aisle or the home aisle to buy things. Like they're stocking their office break room. That's a completely different mind shift. And so really having to peel that back and understand that without having necessarily historical data to lean on, even a company like Amazon. It's like, how do you get creative with what you do know? How do you go and find the data that you need? The other, I would say, of different challenges might be organizational challenges, like stepping in, even if you are one of the first marketing hires, or maybe there was a marketing team, but they're rebuilding from the ground up. Make no mistake, someone in the org has probably been doing something marketing-esque. And you really have to peel that layer back and figure out what are the misconceptions or preconceptions people have coming in of what marketing is expected to do. Maybe some of the things that are not within marketing's realm, but you really have to challenge the status quo. I've got some experience there I can talk through with, for instance, at ChowNow, they weren't doing any customer marketing. They had a huge customer success team, but marketing was very reactive to that. It was, hey, we need to send out an email. How do you actually start to talk to them and say, you know what, marketing can actually have a hand in what does onboarding look like? What does customer marketing look like? I always see it as that 360 view of we see things that are happening on Google and Facebook before they even start buying, but what's also in the product? What are you and what is actually coming out from the company? So how do you bring all of that together and bring all those parties into the room? And then I guess the other organizational challenge I'd say is obviously cross-functional relationships. They're non-existent. So there's baggage there that you have to really unpack. I think as you're getting into a role of like, how do you build from the ground up? Those are the things that are top of mind that you're really gonna have to learn how to navigate.
So a lot of things that were really important in there. One of the biggest, I think, when you talked about customer success and how marketing can help there, not be reactive. Typically, in a lot of customer success organizations, we're answering questions from a client. We're trying to cross sell and upsell. And that's like a good customer success support effort. But 30 to 40% of a company's new revenue year over year should be coming from their existing customers. Yet we chase new logo development. And so that gets a lot of our attention. It gets a lot of our resources. But if 30 to 40% of new revenue should be coming there, absolutely we should be understanding our customers at whole new levels, doing campaigns around them, supporting them. Tell us a little bit more about maybe some of your thoughts around that, because 30 to 40% revenue growth is huge. So when you talk about campaigns, you talk about marketing getting more involved in customer success. Tell us a little bit more about what you think about that.
Yeah, one of the things that I looked at, for instance, when I was over at China was how do I segment my customers from going from a casual customer to a top tier customer? Also did this over at Amazon Business because I ran customer growth there. And so it was really about once you have an Amazon Business account, how do we continue to have you keep buying? Built out things like a high value action framework. What are the activities that make one of those top tier customers? What are the commonalities? How do I look at the data? What are they actually doing? And what are the commonalities that I can find there and create an actionable marketing framework from that? And that's something that can span not just marketing, but product, customer success, like sales. How do you even drive that from the pre-sales motion that you're teeing some of those things up, for instance? So trying to identify what are those actions a customer can take that are actually important. So the example maybe I'd give for Chow Now online ordering, it's kind of a no-brainer, but photos, if you have many photos on your site, that tends to be much more creative. People tend to buy more. That's much more interesting. And then we found that most of our customer base did not actually have photos. How do you create that as a high value action framework and then go in and say, okay, now we have marketing campaigns. Sales is talking about it when they're actually selling the product. How is product making that easier to drive as an adoption perspective? How is customer success using that as an upsell motion? So those types of things can help your customer kind of move from like one segment to the next segment and building that modality. And then marketing again is prime, I would say, to actually create something and centralize that kind of operation. So again, did that at Amazon, did that over at Chanow, but I feel very strongly and passionately about that.
Well, and really, a lot of companies, you mentioned there, have a rather broad definition of their ICP. The ICP is the customer that keeps repurchasing again. That's what you're trying to emulate, right? So working to understand that, how you create the frameworks and the campaigns and everything that support that. But that definition should drive every decision in the organization so that you're not bringing the wrong ICP in, where the organization isn't set up to handle them. And we're spending lots of resources. They're going to churn, or NRR is going to get affected, right? It's the wrong fit for the organization. So really understanding that not only drives a lot of revenue, but it drives the whole pipeline process as well.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is like those sets of actions may change depending on if you have multiple segments as within your ICP, for instance. That's also really important. So for a place like Amazon, where you're really targeting everyone, like there's no reason why you couldn't buy from Amazon, whether you're an educator buying for work or you're an office manager working in a high-tech company. But those sets of actions that may unlock you to the next level may look different. An educator may need to start in books. Again, making that up. But that's going to be an example of, hey, how do I need to really make sure what is that top tier customer looking like? And how do I help them unlock that? I think of it from a customer centric perspective of this is how the customer is going to get the most out of the product. And this is what's going to make them sticky. And so that's the thing that you want to look at.
So tell me about this idea of high velocity sales. And we talked about high velocity sales and PLG strategies. Let's unwrap that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting space because I think when it comes to high velocity SMB, and again with Amazon, it was more of the PLG motion, but it is how do I sign up? How do I sign up for free? It comes as like, how do I get them to continue spending? What's really unique is that in a lot of ways, like I had to throw out the B2B playbook. I come from an enterprise cybersecurity background where, hey, it is like multi-million dollar deals or multi-year deals and multi-million dollars. When you're thinking about thought leadership, you're thinking about buying groups, whereas when you're thinking about high velocity SMB, PLG, like a lot of these times it's much smaller, they act a lot like consumers. And so it's very interesting. It opens up new channels for you, whether that's like more social, more video. Referrals became a big motion, right? Obviously, you can do in the B2B space, but you can really unlock that as a consumer channel. And that works really well for SMB. I'd say also there are things like, hey, we need to do these nurtures, and you have a particular cadence of you don't want to inundate them with too many hard offers. Not necessarily the case with PLG, which has been an interesting one. There's actually kind of rhythm to it of like, okay, we want to be able to hit them with hard offers of, hey, sign up for a demo or sign up for a free account. That works fairly well. Even things like list purchases, look, those are things that again I had coming into it was like, no, it's like a cold email, but it works. Some of it works.
And so I guess a lot of it is how do you just test and learn and see what works?
Mobile is obviously very huge when it comes to SMB as well, because so much of the lives just more integrated, I think. They're less tied to your computer and have the 9 to 5, especially when I was talking with restaurateurs, when I'm talking to solopreneurs, maybe buying an Amazon business. Their life is their business and it's integrated into their social channels. They're looking on their personal stuff as well as looking at ideas for work. And so you have to be in that mindset when you're selling to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I really love that you said there is breaking the mold of the traditional way that we look at B2B. You were saying that the SMB market, they act a lot like customers in a lot of ways. Well, Amazon actually helped train B2B buyers to expect B2C levels of experience. We're living in a world where there's a lot that we need to be learning from the B2C world as we apply it to the B2B world. And yeah, if I can get something to the Prime account in 2 days, or sometimes I can get something ordered this morning and get it this afternoon, right?
Yeah, and same level of customer support, customer service, and in some cases, it's even better than that, right? The stakes are higher because, hey, I'm an enterprise. Of course, I expect premium support, but I also expect it instantly, like I would as a consumer. Like it's just so ingrained, I think, in just that day to day.
So you went from cybersecurity, you went to Amazon, SMB world. We've been talking a lot about that. You're now CMO at Willow, and that's not necessarily an SMB market. And this a longer sales cycle, much more traditional B2B ABM marketing. I don't want you to reveal your strategies, but it's interesting because you've gone back and forth. And a lot of the folks that are on this podcast are in a traditional ABM B2B motion. So, how are you thinking about transitioning what you learned in this SMB world and working with Amazon, how you're going to be applying it, but how you recommend that the rest of us are applying it in an ABM model as well?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, again, some folks come in with a playbook of like, hey, this is exactly how I'm going to go and rebuild the team and all of it. I've done this over and over again. And I guess what I've learned, and maybe because I've changed like just industries and changed the types of customers that I go after, it's very much like, hey, how do I go in and just really look at where is the organization need the most? Is everyone talking about the product in the same way? How are they talking about the product? Do they have a clear understanding of the value? Can they actually talk about that? Can they quantify that? Because if you can't talk about it as a company, how can your customers do it? So there's
Right.
that element of it. How am I thinking about which channels they have? What's that mix look like? So there's some things that I look at and say, okay, where does the organization need me the most? And how do I lean into that particular area? And that can change depending on customer and company. I'd say that there are probably some considerations that say maybe apply overall. And so one of them might be, as I'm thinking about it, how do I think about channel diversification? That's a clear one that I've learned over time. Going into all these different things, it's so easy to say, hey, we're really good at our core channels, whether that's going to be your Google, your Meta, your email, and just lean on those. What I've learned is it's so easy for something to go wrong with one of those channels, whether it's an algorithm that changes, it's completely out of whack, or something else that happens. So, how are you constantly testing into new channels to learn what works and what works for your customer set? So, yes, rely on those, but it's constantly a building up and building up more competencies in other areas. So, I feel like that remains true no matter what. I think coming up again with that messaging I talked about is really how are you articulating your value, making sure that you have clear ways to and quantify it. That's a whole exercise that's consistent no matter what. And then I think what I would also say is the way that you build for modularity, and the way that I say it is how do you build to scale? There's obviously a technological component to that of, okay, I need to build a program that can support 50 customers, but tomorrow, the future could support 1 million customers. There's a technical way to build that. I think this is me with the marketing ops background coming in, but there's also a way to like, how do I think about if I'm going to go after a particular value pillar, I'm going to go after a particular segment, how do I use that as a rallying cry for maybe a team or just me or just a small group of people, especially when you're starting out? and you really go deep in that area. So that gives you a chance to build the content there, learn the kind of the rhythms, learn what works, what doesn't, do the testing with your sales team, test the messaging, test what's out there. And it's really just a learning area. And then keep that as, hey, now this is evergreen. I'm not going to turn it on, but now I'm going to go and shift next quarter to something else and really keep building and building. And that's how you build from scratch, is that you're always building on top of something. So it becomes more additive versus like, hey, I'm switching every other month, or I'm trying to do all things at once, because you just can't do that many things at well, especially when you are by yourself or with a small team.
Yeah, I love this idea of experimenting, because as soon as we keep relying on the same old things, to your point, an algorithm's going to change. They should do a lot of meta marketing, like, oh my gosh, it changes like all the time. But we used to words, it doesn't anymore. So there's new channels in the market, there's new trends, there's new technologies, there's new paths to the market all the time that are happening. So we have to be experimenting with that. Now, one of the things that I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. We didn't even talk about this, but before this is the kind of thing, though, we're living in a world, especially with B2B buyers, especially when they're representing a buying committee. It's very not at all an SMB kind of a thing. The buying committee over the last 10, 15 years has literally like tripled, quadrupled. So all of a sudden, the amount we have to be enabling our B2B buyers. They're selling internally. They run into problems all the time with IT or procurement or whatever it is. And at the same time, they're waiting longer and longer to want to engage with us. Self-service B2B buyer trend that Gardner and everybody talks about that is here. It's like 80+%. They don't want to talk to us until they're almost got their final consideration set in place. So my question to you is, how do we reach that? How do we reach them? How do we combat that? Not all of us are household names where we're just automatically going to be on the consideration set. If we don't get in there and we don't start talking to them, we're out of the picture. How do we, in this kind of a mode, in an ABM process, and I don't know how much of a household name Willow is, but I'm sure this is something you're going to be thinking about as the CMO.
Yeah. That's where I do think it's, how do you bring that conversation increasingly upper funnel? It is that thought leader building, but it's also how do I just help them solve problems? So I think taking a customer centric approach to how do I just help my customers do what they need to do? People trust that. I think that a lot of companies have done a really great job. HubSpot, for instance, is the one that everyone throws out that's done just a phenomenal job of like, hey, if I need to go do something, like HubSpot's got a ton of content as an SMB marketer, I can go and look. And so I think there is a lot of that of how do you establish yourself? Obviously, that's a lot more challenging because that's huge content they've amassed over time. But again, I do think it's how we think about how do we help them along that way. And then I do think that it's, again, how do you help them self-serve? Because you know that they're going to do it no matter what. And so how do you let them have the content that they need to be able to make that decision in a way without having to break from some of the B2B molds of where everything's always gated? Like, play around with that. I
Right.
think with my experience learning at Amazon was like, how do you work with product so that you can embed some of that within the product itself or make that as easy as possible or as seamless? I think an untapped area for marketing to just really look at, hey, everything that product is building, those words on a page, how can marketing be involved in that process? What is the real estate marketing has within the onboarding, within the sign up? Those are all touch points, and people are self-serving. So can marketing get in there and be ingrained in it? And that's a very interesting perspective that not all companies do that, or marketing doesn't really have the seat to be able to do that. But I think as a leader, try to build that bridge, right?
Oh, I love that. I think more of your longitudinal customer
Mhm.
engagement and doing things that are not necessarily traditional what the
Yeah.
CMO is going to do and the marketing function is going to do, which you're just bringing up right now. So I'm going to let you roll that. What is this idea, this longitudinal customer engagement and marketing's role in this?
Yeah, I think of it as across the journey. Like, it is that 360 view. It's making sure that you're that centerpiece of how do you even bridge between sales to any CX team and into the product. Marketing can be that hub. And so how do you help create that seat for yourself to be able to have those conversations? And one of the things that I think worked really well when we were at Amazon was trying to figure out like, hey, what did that process look like between, hey, they signed up to when they actually went in and started purchasing? And we found all sorts of things in that little process of onboarding because you have to be verified as a business. What is that first screen that you see? My team ran when you actually sign in with your Amazon business account and you logged in Amazon. That screen was owned by my team from a marketing perspective. So what does that need to look like? So everything from throughout that journey, there's so much that goes into it. So you just be surprised. We spent so much time, and the customer itself probably just sees it for minutes, but you could spend so much time in there and it makes such a huge difference. Like you would see, like that's where we really saw kind of the gold.
So tell me more about your ways in thinking about that's one fantastic way of finding that gold, that customer journey, understanding their journey, how to help them earlier in that process, unlocking that. That's the key to this self-service. So, what are some other ways that you unlock those insights?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the word longitudinal. I love that word. I think it really is about pushing even just the way you view your marketing metrics longitudinally. This is probably no surprise, but hey, it doesn't stop at, hey, I just created an MQL. It definitely doesn't stop at an opportunity. It doesn't stop at, hey, it's closed one. But how am I actually creating an active customer that renews or that stays with the business? When you start shifting that as your goalpost and doing the instrumentation to be able to see that data, but also to just view your team in that way, I think your perspective on the activities that matter then change. So that's where I think it starts from that tops down. And that was something we built out at Chow Now, was that full funnel reporting, where I was actually able to say within 3, 6, 9 months, how much was the customer spending that we brought on through marketing. And that changes how you think about it. Because that's where I say, even during the sales process, when they're talking about what those expectations are going to be in onboarding or what some of the things down the road of an upsell cross-sell might be, like that starts to get embedded earlier and earlier. Marketing has the opportunity to do that, to build content that speaks to that part of the funnel, but also speaks to the second funnel that gets created. So I do think the data and that mindset shift and how you look at it is huge.
Absolutely. And I love that in the traditional world, marketing's involvement ended at the MQL. Chuck it over the fence and like now sales, it's up to you. And what you're talking about is we're supposed to own revenue, we're supposed to own pipeline along with the rest of the C-suite. A true CRO these days oversees the whole go-to-market motion. So marketing, customer success, and sales, we all have to be players in owning that pipeline. You're saying that pipeline doesn't end with a closed deal. It goes far beyond that.
Yeah.
So I love that perspective. What I want to ask is, what haven't we covered? We've gone over a lot of topics, but what haven't we talked about that you think is going to be really important that the audience needs to know?
Yeah, it's a great question. We haven't talked too much about team building, I guess. So we can talk a little bit about how do you build and scale that team? Because I've been in these roles where, hey, I came in when there's early marketing, maybe small team, and we went to a much larger team, a global team. I guess one of the things I would say there is I think more marketing organizations shift back and forth. You get channel owners versus objective owners. I've always, especially early on, have been a big fan of objective owners. I mean that in the sense of like you're going to own customer activation. So having more goal sets around that, because especially when you have such a lean team, that gives them much more freedom to say, hey, I'm going to learn these different channels, or I'm going to think about the content in a different way. And you can build players that maybe aren't necessarily have that in their background, but you can kind of mold them to be more generalist, so to speak, but not in this all around. How do I have more things at my disposal versus, hey, I'm purely demand gen and I'm in this bucket and that's all I'm going to do. And I'm just going to focus on digital channels. So I've been a big fan of doing that from early on. And at some point you need to shift and say, yes, I need to have more of a services group and all that. Growing pains as an organization grows. But I think early on, making sure people have clear objectives as objective owners, that's huge. And that unlocks a lot of potential for individuals. So that's one of my, I guess, things that I have found have worked well as a team leader.
What you're doing is you're saying there's a top-down kind of approach where it's like, I own everything and the team executes. But what you're talking about is no, now I may be the CMO of this organization, but you own this. That only places the emphasis on you need to be working hard in order to do that. But giving the team responsibility and making them feel not just like a cog, but an important part of the overall team, the overall success that we're creating is absolutely critical because then you feel like you're important. That's a big step forward in terms of, your long-term growth in the company and what you're doing and how you feel like you're contributing. So I love that. Owning, objective owners. Okay. I got another important question for you. So I want to make sure I get it in before we get to the end of the podcast here. And that is, you've done so much. You've been involved in so many very, very successful companies. What are you the most proud of when you look back at your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely my time at Amazon, it tops the list in the sense that it was just so phenomenal to build something that grew so quickly in such a rapid period of time. It's one of the fastest growing startups that was within Amazon for it to now be a $35 billion global business. It was 25 billion when I was there over 5 years. But I think just being a part of that and owning that customer growth team, that was really an exciting time for me. I'm a problem solver. I like to build. And so just being able to say, hey, how do we build this? How do we handle systems that don't actually support like this many millions of customers? Those are all things I had to build because the traditional Amazon systems didn't support B2B. Our segmentation tools didn't support B2B because they're more geared towards consumer. I think that piece of having to do that was very exciting. And there's certainly projects within that I'm very proud of as well.
So everything that we've talked about here today, the human brain, we can't take too much information in and retain it all, right? So if there was a single takeaway that you wanted others to have, to remember from our conversation here, what would be the most important takeaway you'd want them to leave with?
Yeah, I think the one that I would emphasize again is that it's not just the playbook that you bring and you kind of rinse and repeat everywhere, because I do feel like it's that test and learn, and we talked about building from scratch, right? I think there's obviously things that in our careers, where we are as chief marketing officers, we know works and we can bring that on. That's great. But there's also an opportunity to really break from the mold. And again, I learned that from working in like the PLG motion or working more with SMB, like things that you really have to just test and almost dispel your own beliefs of everything that you've learned over the time. I think being willing to do that and come in and say, hey, let me try something new that I've never done, or no, this is more of a consumer tool, or they don't buy that way. Those are all things that I think are really important. And just making sure that every single thing you're doing is testing. Like I see every opportunity getting in front of a customer, every email, every ad, that is an opportunity to test. And if we're not testing and learning and doing that, we're not doing our jobs. So that's one of the philosophies that I personally have of like, hey, every single email that we do should include a test in it. And then how do I use those learnings to really build upon it?
Love that, because it's easy to fall back on the playbook. Testing means you're constantly doing more work, right? You're constantly forcing yourself to learn and not just rinse and repeat, rinse and
Yeah.
repeat. So it takes more effort to do that.
Yes.
And as humans, we like to fall back on what's familiar and what worked.
Sometimes it's slower too, because sometimes it is more work or there's more red tape or whatever it is, but it ultimately allows your customers to tell you how they want to be marketed to if you do it that way. And I think at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Let the customers guide those decisions. We spend hours and hours, countless of meetings of like, hey, should we do it this way or that way? It's like, let the customers tell us. And that's what I love about the testing. And again, there's multiple ways. It's not just the messaging, or it's just not like, hey, does this email look better than this email? I talked about testing into new channels. How do I build competencies in new areas? Does this actually work or not? So I just think that's very important, especially when you're building from scratch and willing to break from that mold.
I love it. I know there's going to be a lot of questions because we had so much good conversation here. If there were follow-on questions that people had, would it be okay that we handed out your link to maybe your LinkedIn profile that people could get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's like Miss Joanna Nguyen, and we can share that out with everyone.
Fantastic. Joanna, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your insights. This is the way we learn. This is a continuing education that we need to, as much as we need to test, we need to constantly be saying, how do I learn from the experience of others? So I just appreciate you coming in and sharing your experiences with us.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Steve. I really appreciate it.